In the suffocating summer of 1866, a young man walks through the fetid streets of St. Petersburg, his mind churning with theories of murder. Pain and suffering are always inevitable for a large intelligence and a deep heart. These words, etched by Fyodor Dostoevsky, capture the terrible mathematics of consciousness itself. When intelligence meets suffering, what calculations emerge, what equations of guilt and redemption write themselves across the human soul. The axe gleams in afternoon light, heavy with possibility. Metal catches shadow, shadow catches thought, and thought catches the trembling hand of Rodion Raskolnikov. Here stands the geography of crime, not in action, but in the mind's terrible capacity to justify anything. The weapon becomes philosophy made flesh, theory transformed into steel and wood and the weight of what we dare to become. St. Petersburg breathes like a fever patient. Yellow buildings lean against grey sky. The Neva River flows black with industrial waste and human dreams. This is Dostoevsky's stage, a city where poverty crushes souls like paper, where every alley whispers of desperation. The author knew these streets intimately, having walked them as a young radical, a condemned man, a prisoner returned. In 1849, Dostoevsky faced a firing squad. Mock execution. The rifles raised, the order given, then reprieve. 10 years in Siberian prison camps followed. 10 years of chains, of human degradation, of watching how suffering strips away pretense to reveal what lies beneath civilization's thin veneer. Every page he later wrote carried the weight of that almost death. The pawnbroker's apartment reeks of cabbage and human decay. Alyona Ivanovna counts coins with fingers like dried twigs. She becomes more than victim. She transforms into symbol, the hoarder of money while others starve, the keeper of treasures while souls wither. In her wrinkled face, Raskolnikov sees not person but abstraction, not humanity but obstacle to his grand design. Am I a louse, or do I have the right? The question burns through Raskolnikov's consciousness like acid through metal. He divides humanity into two categories: ordinary people who live by rules, and extraordinary individuals who create their own moral law. Napoleon, Caesar, those who transcend conventional morality through sheer force of will. The murder happens in minutes. The aftermath consumes a lifetime. Blood spreads across wooden floors, seeping between boards, staining the grain. But the real crime scene exists in Raskolnikov's mind, a theatre where guilt performs its endless, exhausting drama. The body may be hidden, but conscience cannot be buried. Dostoevsky himself knew the weight of political crime. As a young man, he joined the Petrashevsky Circle, a group of intellectual revolutionaries who dared to dream of social transformation. Their crime: reading forbidden books, discussing the abolition of serfdom, imagining a Russia where human dignity mattered more than imperial power. For this, they faced death, or worse, the slow death of Siberian exile. Sonia Marmeladova sells her body to feed her family. Yellow ticket clutched in trembling fingers, the prostitute's license that marks her as society's refuse. Yet in her eyes burns something unconquerable: love, faith, the radical belief that human beings possess inherent worth regardless of what they've done or what's been done to them. She becomes Raskolnikov's salvation, though he doesn't yet know it. The yellow ticket echoes throughout the novel like a bell tolling for the damned. Yellow, the colour of sickness, of decay, of the sulphurous light that illuminates hell, but also the colour of wheat fields, of sunlight, of hope's strange persistence. In Dostoevsky's hands, even damnation carries seeds of redemption. Even the deepest fall contains the possibility of resurrection. Russia in the 1860s trembles on the edge of transformation. Tsar Alexander II has freed the serfs, but freedom without economic opportunity creates new forms of bondage. Into this chaos come the nihilists, young intellectuals who reject traditional values, who believe in nothing but the power of the rational mind. They read German philosophers, speak of Superman theories, and mistake intellectual sophistication for moral wisdom. Raskolnikov's tiny room suffocates like a coffin. 7 paces long, yellow wallpaper peeling like diseased skin. Space becomes psychology. The cramped quarters mirror his cramped soul, his inability to expand beyond the prison of his own obsessions. Every wall reflects his thoughts back at him, creating an echo chamber of guilt and rationalization. The detective Porfiry Petrovitch plays cat and mouse with words. His questions circle like vultures, each one more precise than the last. He understands that criminals don't just commit crimes, they perform them. Every murderer becomes an actor in his own moral drama, and every performance contains the seeds of its own exposure. Truth has weight. Lies eventually collapse under their own contradictions. Dostoevsky's epilepsy shaped his understanding of consciousness. The seizures came without warning, flashes of otherworldly insight followed by darkness, confusion, the slow return to ordinary awareness. This rhythm of revelation and collapse, of transcendence and fall, pulses through every page. His characters don't just think, they experience thought as physical sensation, as spiritual crisis, as the very texture of existence. The resurrection story burns at the novel's heart. Sonia reads to Raskolnikov from the Gospel of John, her voice trembling with conviction. Lazarus, dead 4 days, emerges from the tomb at Christ's command. But resurrection requires acknowledgement of death first. Raskolnikov must die to his old self before he can discover who he might become. The grave must be entered before it can be abandoned. Dostoevsky's gambling addiction nearly destroyed him. In European casinos, he lost everything: money, dignity, his wife's jewelry, his future. Yet from this personal hell came profound insight, the addictive pull of risk, the terrible mathematics of hope and despair, the way human beings convince themselves that the next bet will solve everything. Raskolnikov's crime carries the same desperate logic. The confession scene unfolds like a religious ritual. Raskolnikov kneels before Sonia, kisses her feet, accepts her wooden cross. But this is not Christian melodrama. It's the recognition that salvation requires relationship, that isolation, no matter how intellectually sophisticated, leads only to spiritual death. Love becomes not sentiment, but the fundamental force that makes existence bearable. Siberia transforms from place of punishment to place of resurrection. The prison camp, with its routines and communal life, forces Raskolnikov out of his solitary hell. Here, surrounded by common criminals who somehow retain their humanity, he discovers that his theories about extraordinary individuals were elaborate forms of self-deception. Ordinary people, it turns out, possess extraordinary capacity for endurance, forgiveness, love. The novel's structure mirrors its themes. 7 parts, like the 7 days of creation, the 7 deadly sins, the 7 stages of grief. Each section peels away another layer of pretense, another rationalization, another barrier between Raskolnikov and the truth of what he's done. The architecture of the book becomes the architecture of confession, of gradual revelation. Dostoevsky wrote with creditors pounding at his door. Publishers demanded pages. Poverty pressed like a physical weight. Yet from this pressure came art of uncompromising intensity. Financial desperation forced him to write quickly, to trust his instincts, to let his characters speak without editorial interference. The novel's fevered pace reflects the fevered circumstances of its creation. The dream sequences glow with apocalyptic intensity. Raskolnikov sees the world consumed by a plague of ideas, intellectual viruses that turn people into fanatics. Each person believes they alone possess the truth. Society collapses into warring fragments of absolute conviction. The dream becomes prophecy, anticipating the ideological catastrophes that would soon engulf Russia and the world. Dunya, Raskolnikov's sister, embodies the novel's complex understanding of sacrifice. She prepares to marry a man she doesn't love to save her family from poverty. But Dostoevsky reveals the hidden violence in such noble gestures. Self-sacrifice can become a form of spiritual murder, a way of avoiding the harder task of creating authentic relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation. The city itself becomes a character, diseased, beautiful, crushing, inspiring. St. Petersburg's white nights create a dreamlike atmosphere where normal boundaries dissolve. In this liminal space, crime becomes possible, redemption becomes necessary, and the human soul reveals its capacity for both transcendence and degradation. The geography of the novel mirrors the geography of consciousness itself. Svidrigailov represents the path Raskolnikov might have taken. Wealthy, amoral, convinced that individual desire justifies any action. Yet even this apparent monster contains seeds of humanity. His final act, suicide, becomes paradoxically moral, a recognition that some boundaries cannot be crossed without destroying the crosser. His death clears space for Raskolnikov's resurrection. The novel's psychology predates Freud by decades. Dostoevsky understood that human beings are not rational actors but bundles of contradictory impulses, unconscious drives, and inexplicable longings. His characters don't just act, they enact their deepest conflicts on the stage of everyday life. Every conversation becomes a battle between conscious intention and unconscious revelation. The theme of money corrupts every relationship. Raskolnikov's mother sends her last rubles. His sister prostitutes herself through engagement. The pawnbroker hoards wealth while others starve. Yet Dostoevsky doesn't offer simple moral judgment. He reveals how economic systems create impossible choices, how poverty forces people into degrading compromises, how money becomes both salvation and damnation in a world without adequate safety nets. The novel's religious imagery operates on multiple levels. Christianity appears not as doctrine but as lived experience, as the radical possibility of forgiveness and transformation. Dostoevsky himself struggled with faith throughout his life. His Christianity was hard-won, battle-tested, earned through doubt rather than inherited through tradition. This spiritual wrestling match energizes every page. The influence of German philosophy permeates the novel. Nietzsche would later write about the Superman, but Dostoevsky anticipated and critiqued these ideas before they were formally articulated. Through Raskolnikov's tragic experiment, he demonstrates the human cost of theories that place individual will above communal responsibility. The Superman, it turns out, is often just a man trying to escape the weight of his own humanity. The novel's dialogue crackles with subtext. Characters rarely say what they mean directly. Instead, they circle, probe, retreat, attack through indirection. This verbal fencing reflects the psychological complexity of human communication. We speak to hide as much as to reveal, to test as much as to inform. Every conversation becomes a form of moral archaeology. Dostoevsky's portrayal of women challenged 19th century conventions. Sonia and Dunya are not passive victims, but active moral agents who shape their own destinies. They embody different forms of strength, Sonia's radical acceptance, Dunya's fierce independence. Through them, the novel suggests that salvation requires both masculine and feminine principles, both justice and mercy. The novel's publication history reveals its immediate cultural impact. Russian readers recognize themselves in Raskolnikov's spiritual crisis, in the society's moral confusion. Critics debated whether Dostoevsky was promoting or condemning radical ideas. The ambiguity was intentional. The novel works as both cautionary tale and profound exploration of the revolutionary impulse that was transforming Russian society. The concept of suffering as purification runs through the novel like an underground river. But this is not masochistic wallowing in pain. Instead, Dostoevsky suggests that suffering, when honestly faced, strips away illusions and reveals truth. The characters who grow are those who stop running from their pain and start learning from it. The novel's influence on modern literature cannot be overstated. From Kafka to Camus, from Sartre to Solzhenitsyn, writers have returned to Dostoevsky's insights about guilt, freedom, and responsibility. His exploration of the criminal mind predated modern psychology. His understanding of political fanaticism anticipated 20th century totalitarianism. His portrayal of urban alienation mapped the modern condition. The prison camp sequences glow with unexpected hope. Surrounded by murderers and thieves, Raskolnikov discovers human kindness he never encountered in respectable society. The criminals, unburdened by intellectual pretensions, show genuine compassion. They teach him that moral wisdom often emerges from the margins, rather than from the centers of power and education. Dostoevsky's own experience of mock execution haunts the novel's treatment of death and resurrection. Having faced his own mortality, he understood that life's meaning emerges not from avoiding death, but from confronting it. Every character must die to some version of themselves before they can be reborn. The novel becomes a guidebook for spiritual transformation through crisis. The novel's ending refuses easy resolution. Raskolnikov's confession and exile mark the beginning of his journey toward redemption, not its completion. 7 years of hard labor lie ahead. The path to salvation will be long, difficult, uncertain. But for the first time he faces the future with hope rather than despair, with love rather than isolation. The book's contemporary relevance feels almost prophetic. In our age of social media and viral ideologies, Raskolnikov's plague dream resonates with new urgency. How do we maintain human connection in an age of digital isolation? How do we resist the seductive pull of theories that justify moral compromise? How do we find meaning in a world that often seems meaningless? Dostoevsky's legacy extends beyond literature into philosophy, psychology, and political thought. His insights about human nature influenced thinkers from Nietzsche to Solzhenitsyn. He mapped the interior landscape of the modern soul, its capacity for self-deception, its hunger for meaning, its terrible freedom to choose between love and hatred, creation and destruction. The novel's final image lingers in memory. Raskolnikov and Sonia, hand in hand, facing an uncertain future with newfound hope. Love has not solved their problems but has made them bearable. Redemption has not erased their past, but has opened a path toward a different future. The cross they carry becomes not burden but gift. In the end, Crime and Punishment reveals that the greatest crime is not murder, but the denial of our fundamental interconnectedness. The greatest punishment is not exile, but the isolation we create when we convince ourselves that we are separate from, superior to, or exempt from the common human condition. The greatest redemption is the recognition that we are all, in our brokenness and our striving, worthy of love.